Thank you for joining us for another episode of AJ and 8. Last week we talked a little bit about DERs, and I wanted to kind of jump into that topic a little bit more. DERs kind of refers to two different things. DER in the DR sense, which would be considered demand response, as well as DER on the DER sense, which is distributed energy resources. And that's what we want to talk about today. What is the DERs? What are these DERs? What does it mean? The benefits, the challenges associated with it. So a DER is a small scale unit of local generation that's connected to the grid at the distribution level. So the arrival of DERs, which is this source of decentralized community or building generated energy, and its two-way flow of power really is transforming the grid. Conventional power stations such as coal-fired, gas, nuclear power plants, as well as hydroelectric dams and large-scale solar stations, solar power stations, these are all centralized and often require energy to be transmitted over long distances. You may have heard the term T&D, transmission and distribution. Whereas by contrast, DER systems, they're decentralized, modular, they're more flexible technologies that are located close to the load that they serve. So it becomes a little bit more efficient, and these systems, they can comprise multiple generation and storage components. And in this instance, they're referred to as what they call a hybrid power system. And a microgrid would definitely fit all of these descriptions. So DERs can include behind-the-meter renewable and non-renewable generation, but the DERs typically use renewable energy sources, and they can include energy storage, electric vehicles, other controlled loads that are metered separately, like appliances like hot water systems. They also include inverters, which are electronic devices that change DC or direct current to AC or alternating current. DERs also comprises of new technologies like smart meters and data services. A common example of a DER that we all know would include rooftop solar PV units, natural gas turbines, microturbines, wind turbines, biomass generators, fuel cells, cogen or tri-generation units, battery storage, electric vehicles, EV chargers, as well as demand response. It's a lot of different things that fit into this terminology of DERs. And it's these separate elements that work together to form this distributed generation. Microgrids increasingly employ a mixture of distributed energy resources in different forms and different mixes, such as, these solar hybrid power systems, right? Which, again, reduce the amount of emitted carbon significantly. When we talk about DERs, the DER penetration has been growing every year, both nationally and internationally. And with the increased penetration of DERs into the grid comes a few benefits and opportunities for the power systems as well as its participants. Number one is affordability. Customers with access to DER assets typically can expect to pay less for electricity as they sell back power to the grid and are compensated for allowing their storage systems to stabilize the grid, especially during peak periods. It can become a source of revenue, and we talked a little bit about that, that demand response, the other DER. Number two would be avoided infrastructure investments, as well as reduced network costs. This could lead to, a decrease in the overall cost of energy. In one study, it was found that investments in DERs could reduce network expansion costs by almost 60% by 2050. The third benefit would be increased integration of clean energy. DERs typically comprise of renewable energy generation, and again, that helps many overall community, state, and global initiatives for clean energy integration. And a fourth benefit for these DERs and the integration of DERs is something that I talk about often, and it's improved resilience and reliability. And in areas where there's a high reliance on what they call variable energy resources, like wind and solar, DERs can be employed to help balance the grid and improve its reliability, either by reducing the demand or by providing energy to help smooth out the intermittent supply. And that's huge. And that's how we'll get into the not so good parts about DERs. And if there's one challenge to renewable energy that ranks above all others, it's the intermittency of solar and wind. Now, according to Webster defines intermittency as, quote, coming and going at intervals, not continuous, close quote. So because wind and sun aren't always available or even predictable, keeping our lights on requires the utilities to constantly fall back to this dispatchable generation sources like nuclear, coal, and natural gas. And so an example of that would be, when I was in high school, I played sports. And whenever we would go to drink water, I always like using one particular water fountain that was by the athletic department because the water was super cold and it always came out like a lot. And I knew I turned that thing on and it was like just constant. So I was able to get the fill and the coolness that I needed. But then on the flip side, there was another water fountain that was by the science department. Hated it. I mean, hated science, but I also hated, I just wasn't as good as I wanted to be, as well as their water fountain wasn't as good as it should have been, because it was one of those fountains where you go to drink it and then it would be low. So you go down to the, part where the water's coming out and then all of a sudden, boom, it just shoot you in your face, right? Intermittency. That's what we don't want. We just want constant flow of energy, of water, that type of stuff, right? Another limiting factor for these DERs is hosting capacity, or the amount of DERs which can be connected to a distribution network and operated within its technical limits, right? So DERs can be incorporated into the grid where there's really no threats or safety. Reliability or other operational features, kind of come into play. And when we think about this, Hawaii is definitely one of those that has capacity issues, right? They don't want any of your excess power. If you want solar, you need to make sure you pair it with batteries, because they don't have the ability for this two-way power. You got to think the electric distribution and generation and distribution channels were built many, many years ago, and they were built for one-way power. Take it from the generation to the distribution. Now with DERs, they're asking for this power to go back and forth, and that's like taking a one-way road and saying, okay, now we're running cars back and forth. So another tangent that we'll talk about next week, which is the hosting capacity, which is in the overproduction side. So we'll definitely get into that next week on this overproduction part. But, as we see, there's a lot of good things, and it's definitely in our best interest to see how we can integrate more DERs for our own purposes as well as our communities. Thank you for joining us at AJ&E. Talk to you later. Aloha.